test, test, 1, 2, 3, testing, 1, 2, 3. Not a sound? Oh, yeah, no, the testing was for the streaming mic. These are two. Make sure. Because this is the one that, if it's not working before we start, it ain't going to start working in the middle. It is an interesting beginning to Shabbat. That was my beloved mother when I was, I guess, like a teenager. I got my first CD boombox, which is like a big deal. I had moved up from tapes. Hey! Warren, give me a second. It's good. Of course you are, Richard. No, you don't have to. If anything carried across the wire and was helpful, that was. Well, I really mean the great deal. I'm really happy to see you here tonight, and we're long overdue to catch up. All right. Well, thanks, guys, for coming. Make yourselves at home. So, as I say, it's the first two CDs that I owned were Sgt. Pepper's and the Best of Van Morrison, which up until very recently I would be very proud to say, but he's turned into a sort of a kook. Oh, no. He's like an anti-vaxxer, and he gives concerts, and it's like a whole thing. His music is brilliant, brilliant, but turns out.
Lost Novoselic.
That's
that one hurt.
It's always a challenge, right? What do you do with the artist and the arts, I suppose. All right. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It's very nice to see you. Ellen Ruby, it's so nice to see you. Ellen and I have seen each other more than most over the last year, only because she bikes by my house on a fairly regular basis. So, it's always a treat to get to turn around and see you there, but it's great to turn around and see you here. I hope everybody had a nice Sukkot so far. Good? Yeah? All right. It's not the same, but, the joyful piece of it is very key. And I want to thank everybody also for last Shabbat for our Ask the Rabbi session. You guys really kept me on my toes. That was pretty impressive. And I know we didn't get to everybody. Marcia asked a great question, which I answered the next morning. So if you were curious about Marcia's question, you can go back and watch last week's. And Andrew, we never even got to yours. So you're just remind me, you're number one the next time we go. It may be a new question this week. We'll see. But in any case, it was really a lovely thing. And again, just especially the day after Yom Kippur, that there were so many people here ready to ask questions was a very wonderful feeling for your rabbi. So I thank you all for that. And I thank Keelan, who, again, this is 2 weeks in a row where we're operating without Cantor Lauren and trying to remember our old service. But it seemed like last week it came back pretty well. So we'll see if we can repeat the experience for week 2. But you guys singing is a big helpful piece of it. So it's nice to hear that when we can. So, Keelan, why don't we do our opening song first, and then we'll do camp. Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom. Yallai la 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 la, yallai la 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 la, yallai la 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 la, ay la 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 la, yallai la 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 la, ay la 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 la. Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. And I will add also Moadim L'Simcha, which is the customary thing you say to people in the intervening days of a holiday like Sukkot or like Pesach, which are multiple days. You say Moadim L'Simcha in the sort of middle places. And tonight there's going to be a few places where I'm teaching about not just Sukkot, but about the upcoming holidays of Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah. But one thing I want to explain tonight, where I'm going to do something that goes a little bit against tradition, because it would go against our tradition to follow it. But technically speaking, on Shabbat Chol HaMoed, on Friday night, you would not actually recite the normal number of components of what we call Kabbalat Shabbat. And remembering that Kabbalat Shabbat, this may go back to Rabbi Leon's days, would often explain that each of the psalms that we do is a psalm that reflects a day of the week leading up to Shabbat. So the purpose of this, or the intention of this, was that in the days in which the temple stood, I believe it was the Levites that would be responsible for this, would chant psalms on particular days of the week. So each of these psalms, right, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, etc. So the reason why we wouldn't do those particular psalms and skip, traditionally you would skip to the 92nd or 93rd psalm, which are the ones for Shabbat specifically. And the reason why we wouldn't do that is because during the period of Chol HaMoed, during the period of intervening days of the holidays, it wouldn't operate like a regular Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. There were different things that were done on each of those days. So just because, right, in the temple it would have been done differently, the liturgy should catch up to it traditionally. Now this is where, again, what we would go back to our conversation last week about minhag, about custom. Once a congregation or a community develops a particular kind of minhag or custom, so long as it's not in violation of some other big issue, halachic issue, you stick with what you know. So if, for example, tonight I said to you we're starting on page 140 instead of page 130, half of you, if not more of you, would give me that look, right? I know that look. I'm not happy with this. The rabbi's doing something, I'm not happy with this. And I don't want to do that tonight, because the other overriding principle on Sukkot is simcha, right? Joy. So if you guys are joyful as you were last week, doing things the way that we've done it, I'll take the hit if I'm wrong on this particular issue. But see, I taught you something. We haven't even gotten started with our service yet. So all that's basically a complicated way of saying things will seem mostly familiar, and the only additions really tonight are things that we do in the Amidah, which I'll explain later. So with all of that explanation, we'll turn to page 120, and we will light our Shabbat candles. Again, page 120, I'm going to light and come back to do the bless. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. Amen. Thank you. We're going to turn now to page 130, and we'll begin Kabbalat Shabbat at the top of the page. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena l'Adonai. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena l'Adonai. Naria, naria, letzoi shenu, nekadma fanav betodah. Naria, naria, letzoi shenu, mizmirot naria lo. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena l'Adonai. lechu ner hanena, lechu ner hanena, lechu ner hanena l'Adonai. Psalm 96 is on page 131. Shiru l'Adonai, shiru shir chadash, shiru l'Adonai kol haaretz, shiru l'Adonai baruchu shemo, basru meyom leyom yeshuato, shiru l'Adonai baruchu shemo, basru meyom leyom yeshuato, shiru l'Adonai, shiru shir chadash, shiru l'Adonai kol haaretz, shiru l'Adonai baruchu shemo, basru meyom leyom yeshuato, shiru l'Adonai baruchu shemo, basru meyom leyom yeshuato. Psalm 97 is on page 132, or Zarua, the last paragraph at the bottom of the page. Or Zarua la tzadik, uleishre lev simcha. Or Zarua la tzadik, uleishre lev simcha. Simchu tzadikim b'Adonai, v'hodu lezecher kodsho. Simchu tzadikim b'Adonai, v'hodu lezecher kodesho. Turn now to page 134, Psalm 98. Zamru l'Adonai bechinor b'kol zimra, b'chatzotrot b'kol shofar. Hariu lifnei hamelech Adonai, Yiram hayam umlo, Tevel veyoshveva, Neharot yimcha uchaf yachad, Harim yiraneinu, Lifnei Adonai kiva, Lishmot haaretz, Yishmot tevel betzedek, Ve'amim b'mesharim, Yiram hayam umlo, Tevel veyoshveva, Neharot yimcha uchaf yachad, Harim yiraneinu. Psalm 99 is on page 135, the last paragraph in Hebrew in the middle of the page. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu lehakodsho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu להקודשו כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו רומם הוא כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו רומם הוא אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להקודשו רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. We turn now to page 136. מזמור לדוד. הבו לאדוני בני אלים, הבו לאדוני כבוד ועוז, הבו לאדוני כבוד שמו, השתחוו לאדוני בהדרת קודש. כל אדוני המים אל הכבוד הרים, אדוני מים רבים, אדוני מים רבים. כל אדוני בכוח, כל אדוני בהדר, כל אדוני שובר ארזים, וישבר אדוני את ארזי הלבנון. וירקידם כמו עגל לבנון וסריון, כמו בן רעים, כמו בן רעים. כל אדוני חוצב להבות אש, כל אדוני יכיל מדבר, יכיל אדוני מדבר קדש. כל אדוני יחולל איילות, ויחשוף יערות ובחלו, כולו מכבוד, כולו מכבוד, כולו מכבוד. אדוני למבול ישב, וישב אדוני מלך לעולם. אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו ושלום. Turn now to page 138 for Lecha Dodi. Again, beginning at the very top of the page, and then I think Keelan in the sixth one, I think, is where we shift. You can just look at me and I'll talk. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela. 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 Shamor וזכור בדיבור אחד, השמיענו אל המיוחד. אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, לשם ולתפארת ולתהילה. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela.
Lecha dodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha, Ki mekor haberacha, Merosh mikedem nesucha, Sof maaseh b'machshava tchila. Lecha dodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Mikdash melech ir melucha, Kumitzei mitoch hafecha, Rav lach shevet be'emek habacha, Vehu yachmol alayich imla. Lecha dodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Hitna'ari me'afar kumi, Livshi bigdei tifartecha mi, Al yad ben Yishai beit halachmi, Korva el nafshi ge'ala. Lecha dodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Hitoreri, Ki va'orech umeuri, uri, shir daberi, Kevod Adonai alayich nikla. Lecha dodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lo tevoshi velo tikami, Ma tishtochachi u'ma tehemi bach, Yechesu aniyei ami v'nivneta ir al tila. Lecha dodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Ve'ayu leshimso shosayich v'rachachu kol, Bev alayich yasis alayich Elohai, Yimsos chatan akala. Lecha dodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Yaminu smol tifrotzi v'et Adonai, Ta'aritzi al yadish, Ben parti v'nismecha, V'nagila. Lecha dodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Boi v'shalom, Ateret ba'ala gam b'simecha, Uvetzolat ochemune, Am segula. Boi chala, Lecha dodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Yai lai lai lai, yai la 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 lai 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 lai, yai la 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 lai lai lai, la 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 yai la la lai, ya la 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 la. Lecha dodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela.
ruach in the room. Good energy. Good. We'll turn now to page 140, Tzadik Katamar, where the Hebrew indents in the middle of the page. Tzadik Katamar Yifrach Keres Balvanon Bebeit Adonai Bechatzrot Eloheinu Yafrichu Od Yenuvun Beseva Deshenim Verananim Lehagim Ki Yashar Adonai Tzuri Velo Havlata We'll turn now to the Chatzi Kaddish on page 144. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbam Alma divrach yirtei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon u'b'yomechon u'b'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael b'agalaha u'b'zman kariv v'yimeru Amen Yehi shmei Rabba mevarach le'ahalam le'al me'ahal maya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitbar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudsha b'richu leila min kol birchata v'shirata tushmechata v'nechemata damihiran behalma v'yimeru Amen. We'll rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 146 for the Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed. Please be seated. Let's read together on the top of page 149 in English. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Your wisdom sets the way on which time and season glide. Your breath guides the sail of the stars. Creator of the tide of time and light, you guide the current of day into night. As heaven spans to infinity, you set its course for eternity. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows.
Umavir yom umevi laila, umavdil ben yom uven laila, Adonai tzvaot shemo. El chai v'kayam tamidim l'cha leheinu le'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, Amari v'aravim.
We'll turn now to page 151, and we'll read together in English at the top of the page. As you taught Torah to those whose names I bear, teach me Torah too. Its mystery beckons, yet I struggle with its truth. You meant Torah for me. Did you mean the struggle for me too? Don't let me struggle alone. Help me to understand, to be wise, to listen, to know. Lead me into the mystery.
כי הם חיינו וערך ימינו, והם נגי יומם ולילה, ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים, ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד.
Please join me on page 154.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך וקומך, וקשרתם להיות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot. That wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. As we turn to page 158.
Ya bye bye bim 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 bam, ya bye bye bim bam, ya bye bye bim 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 bam, ya bye bye bim bam, ya bye 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 bye, ya bye bye bim bam, ya bye 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 bye, ya bye bye bim bam. Mi kamocha bailim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar bakodesh, nor hatihilot osefele, nor hatihilot osefele. Ay bim bim bam, yadanai dai bim bam, yadanai dai bim bim bam, yadanai bim bam, ay dai da 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 da, yadanai dai bim bam, ay dai da 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 da, yadanai dai bim bam. מלכותך ראו בניך, בוקעם לפני משה ומרים, זה ליענו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר כי פד אדוני את יעקב, וגולו מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני, גאל ישראל.
Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Adonai, help us to walk with good companions, to live with hope in our hearts and eternity in our thoughts, that we may lie down in peace and rise up, waiting to do your will. Hashkivenu, page 160.
Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom, ve'hamidenu shomereinu lechaim. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom, ve'hamidenu shomereinu לחיים ושלום מעתה ועד עולם. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים.
Blessed are you, Adonai, guardian of Israel, whose shelter of peace is spread over us, over all your people Israel, and over Yerushalayim. We're on page 162.
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. עין עיני ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת שבת ויהי נפש.
I invite you all now to rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 164 to begin the Amidah together, and as always to continue silently. Just a reminder, on page 174 is the special insert during Sukkot. You'll see it sort of in the middle of the page, and it will give you the indication. You can choose to read it if you'd like. Again, we'll begin together on page 164 and then continue silently.
Adonai sefatai titach rufi yagi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Ose shalom bimromav, uyase shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol Yehoshvei Tevel. Yase shalom, yase shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael. Yahase shalom, Yahase shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. We'll turn now to page 371 as we offer our Misha Baruch this evening, praying for healing. We'll begin by thinking of those in our community and connected to our community we know who are in need of that healing. Oren Nachum, Bruce Stager, Chana Ruth Batsara, Jeff Baker, David Tasher, Jim Cohn, Monique Renee Banks Rathbun, Lindsay Epstein, Dolores Michka, Sylvia Orn, Yerachmiel Ben Hinda, Paloma Chauhan, Samuel Moskowitz, Chaim Live, Joyce Weinberg, Rick Gold, Stu Pollack, Jane London, Catherine Guarino, Emunah Chava, Judy Stern, Miriam Cornfield, Raz Brody, Chana Ruth Batsara, Fagel Tzipora Bat Elisheva Batsara, Richard Gambino, Michelle Sawicki, Idol Basha Bat Yitzchak, Tzvi Menachem and Chaim, Rivka Bat Devora, Amy and Gavin Tucker, Janice Kurz, David Dowling, Israel Ben Yitzchak, Ben Sion Ben Moshe, Lorraine Danis, Buddy Kossoff, Shelley Newmark, David Kyle Klotman, Rivka Bat Rachel, Sarah Bat Chana, Moshe Eliezer Ben Sivia, Peretz Ben Yehuda, Leah Bat Naomi, and Gedalia Ben Leah. I'll certainly invite those watching at home to recite names of loved ones you're thinking of, and for those that are here tonight, we'll start on this side of the room and work towards the back, and then this side of the room. And if you have names to share, just please raise a hand so I can make sure we get everybody. Sorry. We'll join together now on page 371 as we sing our Misha Baruch. Misha Baruch Avotenu Mekor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misha Be'erach Imotenu Mekor HaBracha Lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Moadim l'simcha. So I'm going to teach you tonight something that I'm just assuming that everybody could use at the very least a little bit of a refresher on, but perhaps actually is the first time anybody actually thought to explain it to, including me. But just as a quick, straw poll, how many of you think that you have a very firm grasp of what the holidays of Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah are and what they're about? It's not a judgmental question, just a getting a sense of the room, and obviously we can't ask the virtual room, but I suspect this is usually a good representation of what is happening while we're watching as well. So in those that can't see on the screen, let's just say there weren't a whole lot of hands going up. I mean, not even one of them. So then I think I feel much more comfortable with what I have intended for tonight. So it's not your doing, and it's not even really mine. It happens to actually be something that is much more complicated than we assume. As it turns out, our calendar we take for granted, right? The idea that actually you can project until, literally the sun gives out what Jewish holidays will happen, when they're going to happen from now until eternity. It wasn't always that way. And as it turns out, there are complications from within the Torah, from the rabbis,
and all sorts of things that actually open up, as often is the case for our people. When things are complicated, there's actually great meaning to be found. But we have to do a little bit of work ahead of time just to make sure we're all playing with the same deck of cards. Okay, so I'm going to try to give you first just a sort of logistical overview of what the holiday of Shmini Atzeret is, and what the holiday of Simchat Torah is, and what their relationship is to each other, and what their relationship is to the holiday of Sukkot. Okay, so we'd be forgiven if we thought, for example, that all of this is just one big Sukkot. Okay, that everything is just Sukkot and there's just different names for different things. And the reason why this complication exists goes back, of course, to the Torah. So in Leviticus, we're told, chapter 23, verse 36, okay, 7 days you shall bring offerings by fire to Adonai, this referring to the holiday of Sukkot being 7 days. And now here's where it gets tricky. Okay, B'yom hashmini, mikra kodesh yeh lachem, right? So on the 8th day, you shall observe a sacred occasion, v'hikravtam ishel Adonai, and on that sacred occasion, we'll bring an offering by fire to Adonai. All of this seems sort of straightforward. And then it is where it gets interesting, okay? Ishel Adonai, atzeret hi, kol melechet avodah lo tasu. Okay, atzeret hi, kol melechet avodah lo tasu. So it is, according to this translation, atzeret hi means that this 8th day, whatever we're being called, the Shmini, right? Shmona is the number 8 in Hebrew. Shmini is referring to the 8th day. All we know about it is this word in Hebrew, atzeret. And we, of course, take for granted every time that we look at a translation that that is the correct translation and there are no others. But the reality is that's never the case. Every time that you read a translation of Hebrew into English, Hebrew into any language, you are automatically reading a certain bias into it and a certain assumption into it. Most of the time, 90% of the time, everybody's in agreement on what it says. But that 10% of the time where it's not always clear, or at the very least is ambiguous, that's where we like to play. That's where the rabbis excel. Me, less so. I'm going to use other people's teachings more than my own tonight. So the real question is, what is this 8th day about? Right? It should be a 7-day holiday for Sukkot. So is this 8th day part of Sukkot, its own thing, some combination of the both? The answer is yes. Okay? So it is in the mindset of both the Torah and the rabbis connected to Sukkot in some very significant kinds of ways. Okay? It wouldn't appear otherwise in the same sentence describing 7 days of a festival and then talking about the 8th, unless there is some connection between the two of them. It makes no sense otherwise, just logically speaking. But at the same time, the rabbis in the Talmud discuss it at length, as they are wont to do, and they decide that actually this Shmini day that we know as an Atzeret, again, we'll come to define that in a little bit, is also something distinct, and it needs to be treated also as something unique and distinct as well. Okay, so we're not even getting to Simchat Torah yet. Hold on to that. We'll get to it in a second. Okay, so what the rabbis decide basically is that it's sort of both in and out. It's its own thing, and yet it's also tied to Sukkot. So, for example, we are on Shmini Atzeret, on the 8th day of the festival. We are meant to still eat our meals, right, and reside in the sukkah. Okay, it's still part of Sukkot in that way. However, we do not recite the blessing, Le'shev Basukah, because it is not technically anymore a commanded obligation. Okay, so everybody following so far? Okay, so basically right on this 8th day, you're in the sukkah, but you're not saying the blessing for being in the sukkah. Okay, first variation. Second is because the rabbis decided that it should still be a holiday, but a holiday of its own, we say Kiddush, and we say Kiddush, and in particular, we say Chag HaShmini HaAtzeret Hazeh instead of saying Chag HaSukkot. We acknowledge the fact in Kiddush, which is when we sanctify the day, we acknowledge it for its uniqueness. And at the same time, we also say Shechianu, which is a prayer that normally you would only say at the beginning of a holiday. It would make no sense to say it at the end, but we say it again because Shmini Atzeret is sort of both in and out. Okay, now we're going to get into where it gets really myopic. So, how many of you are familiar with the idea that in the diaspora we tend to celebrate, or at least traditionally, 2 days of Yontif, 2 days of Yom Tov, and in the land of Israel, and according to Reform practice since the 1800s, to celebrate actually only one. Okay? Okay, so we got a couple hands up knowing that piece of it, so that's good. Okay, now if I asked you the next question, why? Say that again, Susan, I can hear you. Okay, very good. Okay, so this is an ancient time-keeping, day-keeping challenge. The way that it used to work, basically, is that when the temple stood, if there was a new moon, you required visual recognition of said new moon. So there were people, basically, who would stand outside, and they would look up at the sky, and as soon as they saw the new moon, they would run to the temple and say, "New moon!" And then the rabbis would say, or the priest would say, "It's a new moon, and now you know it's a new month." Okay? In a lunar calendar, you have two options every month as a potential. It can be 29 days or it can be 30 days. And that was the necessity of having it verified, was to know for sure. Now the problem became when you lived outside of Israel, when you were further away from the temple, it could take a day plus to get the message that the new month had come. And so in any given month, it could be 29 days or 30 days, which would mean that the festival, if you didn't get the message in the right amount of time, you could be celebrating it technically on the wrong day by being off by one. So the idea was to celebrate it basically for 2 days. That way, either way, you're covered. If the month happened to be 29 days, you're good. If the month happened to be 30 days, you're good that way also. And that became basically the custom of the diaspora, and still is to this day. Conservative synagogues, Orthodox synagogues, anywhere else basically other than a Reformed community or in Israel, there is still the intention to celebrate 2 days of a festival. So in that sense, if you grew up in a conservative synagogue like I did, you would have 2 days, a full day of Shmini Atzeret, and then a full day of this thing that we call Simchat Torah. So if I was just asking you, how many of you think Simchat Torah is actually mentioned in the Torah itself? This is something of a lead question. Kind of fishing for, No. Simchat Torah is entirely a creation, ultimately, of the rabbis many generations later, in a way basically to create a circumstance that made sense why there would be 2 days of Yontif for this extra day. So Simchat Torah is essentially its own holiday, and yet at the same time connected to Shmini Atzeret. Its main purpose is to celebrate the completion of reading the Torah and beginning it immediately afterwards. So what happens in a situation where you're not celebrating 2 days is that you combine them basically into one day, right? Beginning at sundown, ending at sundown the next day. So again, in the land of Israel, you will have Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah as one thing. The Erev service is the one that we're familiar with all the dancing with the Torahs and all that stuff. And the next day is the service that contains Yizkor and contains, certain special readings and Hallel and all that kind of stuff. And so again, in Reform communities, we follow the rites basically of what's being done in Israel, because we, for many generations, know that the actual calendar was fixed even a long time ago. And the only reason really why the conservative and Orthodox continue to observe 2 days is simply because of the weight of minhag, of custom. Once something has been done long enough, you want to follow what your ancestors have done, and therefore you continue to do it. But there is no actual logical purpose behind the 2 days of Yontif anymore. It's just simply a practice that is followed. So again, early reform in the 1800s in Germany, they're trying to be as sort of intellectually involved as possible, and therefore they make that decision. Okay, so now I've gotten through all of the, do we all have at least a slightly better sense of the holidays now? Is that good? Okay, good. When I ask you this question next year, you're all going to nod in agreement, I'm sure. Okay, so with my 5 minutes left of your attention span, I want to give you an actual teaching about all of this. So we're not just learning the basics, but we'll go back to this question, what is Shmini Atzeret? Why do we even need it, right? What is the purpose of it beyond the fact that the Torah says that you're supposed to have this 8th day and it's an Atzeret, which we don't know what it means yet. So let me give you a couple examples of how the rabbis understood what this word means, and at the end, hopefully to tie it all together. Okay, so we'll go to Rashi first. So Rashi says, right, Atzeret, what does the word mean? It comes from a root in Hebrew that means restriction. Okay, so the idea is that you're restricted in doing work, which we're told in the Torah itself. And the other explanation was, remember that in the holidays of Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuot, these were harvest holidays primarily, and they were festival holidays and ones in which you were expected to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. So the idea is you're packing up all your stuff, you're bringing your offerings, you're going to Jerusalem, you're celebrating the holiday. Okay, so the Atzeret piece of this is that we were told, according to Rashi, to restrict ourselves from leaving Jerusalem. And this meant that basically all the way up into the last minute of the 7th day, you're busy doing things. You're sacrificing things, you're in the temple, you're busy. You need a day basically to get your stuff together, to let things kind of ease out before you head back home. Okay, so there's actually a fairly rational explanation by Rashi at the beginning that this whole day was really just designed as sort of like, if any of you have ever traveled internationally and you build in a day just to get used to the time zone, it's kind of that logic, right? It's sort of saying like the human being needs a little bit of rest, especially after all of this stuff. Let's give this Atzeret day an extra day, basically, where the word restriction means basically restricted from leaving Jerusalem. Okay, so that may not be such a compelling argument. I'll go back to Rashi again. So another way to understand Atzeret is to hold something back, right? Also another way of thinking of restriction. And he then quotes from a very famous midrash that says, what is this really like? It's an idea that God wants one more day with us. That 7 days of Sukkot is about us being really as close to God as possible. We stop doing all the other stuff. We focus on our relationship with God. And God, being on the other side of this, doesn't want it to end. And so there's this idea basically of attenuating the holiday, extending it by a little bit more time. And they refer to a parable that talks about a king who invited his sons to come and, hang out with him for a week. And when the time was over, didn't want them to go, all right? And says, please just stay with me for one more night, make it last. And I think everybody in this room most likely has this experience either as the child or as the parent, right? At the end of that trip, it's always a bit heartbreaking. So there's this beautiful image, really, of God sitting there up on high saying, boy, I don't want them to leave. It feels really close. Let's extend it. So 2 more quick teachings, I promise. Okay, the next one comes from a book called Ha'amek Davar, which was written by Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, also known as the Netziv, if any of you have ever heard of him. So this is one of his commentaries on, he's 19th century rabbi in Voloshin. So he says this, right? What is an Atzeret? The purpose of the appointed times, the reason that God wanted Israel to gather in Jerusalem and be seen in the courtyard of the temple, is so that they could learn wisdom and discipline from the Kohanim. Jerusalem is the source of the entire world of God, and there they learned how to behave when they returned to their homes after the festival. In the festival's first days, all of Israel was so busy with all the offerings and the festival offerings and the peace offerings and the vows and all the other stuff that there wasn't enough time to actually do any learning, right? Any processing, any growth. So this last day had one particular purpose. It was basically a day of learning. And the people would stick behind, they're done with their sacrifices, and they would sit at the foot of the Kohanim, and they would basically learn and study. And what was the purpose? He says the entire people of Israel was free at that time to accept both discipline and rebuke. Okay, so we maybe don't look at learning probably in that way anymore. I hope you don't feel like I'm disciplining you and rebuking you. But the idea of it is, right, spiritual growth, right? Being challenged in the kind of way that we need to be challenged during the holidays, pushing ourselves spiritually to grow. And sometimes that needs a little bit of, telling you what's what. And so the Kohanim would basically do that in various forms, and that was really, according to this understanding, the purpose of Shmini Atzeret. And I'll leave you with one last one. Okay, this comes from another commentary that's known as HaKatav VeHaKabbalah. It was written by Yaakov Tzvi Mecklenburg, also 19th century rabbi. I should point out the fact that he was no fan of Reform Judaism, but we'll put that aside for a moment. And he writes the following. He says that this, again, Atzeret is about restraint. It teaches us about a matter of great benefit, he says, and that is as follows. The desire for temporal possessions is powerful, and the work to acquire them is very heavy. The more time a person devotes to them, that is, the regular acquisitions of life, the less time that they have for spiritual acquirements as well. The Torah's aim is to free people from this, and he calls it enslavement, and to exchange it for the acceptance of the yoke of heaven, which is basically the euphemism used for studying and taking on the responsibilities of rabbinic law. And thus the Torah gives us appointed times of meeting with God, the festivals, which provide us a spiritual arousal that will distance us from excessive dealings with material possessions. These days make a tremendous impression on us, and this is where it's key, so that all our further dealings in the material world during the weekdays will be for the true purpose. That is why they are called a holy assembly, a preparation to and an invitation to holiness. And to this end, so that we will remain attached to the holy concepts we attained during the festival after it has passed, the last day of Pesach and Sukkot is called an Atzeret. And this is true. It's not just, right? This is Shmini HaAtzeret, but the end of Sukkot is also referred with the same word. And the last word he says, this means a day in which we will exert ourselves with all our strength to keep the precious lessons we became accustomed to during the days of the festival, so that we will not abandon them after the holiday passes. Okay, and this is where I think actually is really the essence of it. The idea of Shmini Atzeret and the idea by extension of Simchat Torah is to help us with what is actually a real challenge. Okay, the holidays end, we're all kind of, up here spiritually, right? Hopefully, right? We've had these experiences, we've confronted our inner selves, we've talked as a community about what we need to do, and Sukkot is a carrying on of all that. We've just spent a whole week or, by the end of this, celebrating and joyful, at least in a normal year, right? All of those things. And then it ends. And then we go back to real life. And how do we take that into life? And if we just run from one thing to the next, if we don't have a day to contemplate, to stop, to think, and ultimately to learn, right? We're not in the temple anymore. We're not learning from the Kohanim. You don't have to just learn from me, right? But if you find some time on the holiday itself and you say, I'm going to learn some Torah I didn't know today. I'm going to go online. I'm just going to Google and find something. or I'm going to learn more about Shmini Atzeret. You'll call the rabbi and ask me something, right? Do any of those things, and you are much more likely to be fulfilling what Shmini Atzeret is actually about than simply to do the kind of rote things that we tend to do. That really, I think, is the essence of it, and I think it is actually important. It's really hard for us to transfer through the rest of the year all of this experience of this special time of year. And remember, again, when all of this is being discussed, the holiday of Hanukkah doesn't exist, right? The Maccabees haven't done anything yet. It doesn't exist. So that meant basically the gap was from Sukkot really all the way until Pesach before you had another major holiday in our calendar. That's a really long time to go without a communal, social, spiritual, growing experience. And so that's why Shmini Atzeret is really meant as that last bridge, right? That midrash, that image of God saying, just wait one more day longer, right? It's because we actually need it, right? It's not just God, we need it. We need a little bit of that decompression, a little bit of that chance to take what we've been thinking about and really concretize it, put it in our pockets so that we can carry it with us kind of thing. And I think, in that way, it's one of the misunderstood holidays that we have. And I think, to me, this actually opened up a whole new way of thinking about it. And I hope that in some way or another, it will have you guys connected more to this holiday that we tend to kind of, dance our way through, but not think about so much. So with that, I wish you all again, Shabbat Shalom, a Moadim L'Simcha, and I hope some of that retains. And I'll invite you now to turn to page 586. We'll rise and body our spirit as we, again, turn to the bottom of page 586. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol latet kedula liotzer breshit shelo asanu kegoyei aratzot velo samanu kemishpachot ha'adama shelo sama chelkeinu kahem vegor aleinu kekol hamonam v'anachnu korim u'mishtachavim u'modim לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו Our thoughts turn to those who have departed this earth, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every race and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and of death. I'll invite now those in mourning and those observing yahrzeit to please remain standing. Everyone else may be seated. This evening, we are first thinking of those who passed in our community in recent months. Sylvia Alderman, Morris Dickstein, Fred Eber, Sandra Furman, Evelyn Gelb, Lucy Gladstone, Arthur Grossman, Elaine Grossman, Phyllis Katz, Jeanette Kopp, Audrey Lubo, Morty Lynn, Jerry Monroe, Harry Olstein, Stephen Jackson Popkin, Danielle Lisa Rigg, Geraldine Rosen, Harriet Roth, Jeannie Rubin, Howard Schreier, Dorothy Shupnick, Paul Silver, Marlise Silverberg, Blanche Sklar, Rita Sandra Snyder, Joan Strong-Tangzilius, Virginia Tizer, and Ann Weiss. We also marked the yahrzeit that occurred during the last week for Philip Abrams, Joseph Alderman, Morris Appel, Benjamin Berkowitz, Mary Bernstein, Selma Bush, Dorothy Cohen, Alan Cornfield, Bess Davis, Rob Yoram Egosi, Sidney Epstein, Terry Becker Friedman, Samuel Fuchs, Nathan Galpern, Leo Goldstein, Diane Gordon, Renee Kern, Bernard Kulik, Joseph Kunkin, Claudio Lemos, Vilma Levine, Julia Meyerson, David Millman, Joseph Nadell, Ruth Ohl, Abraham Peller, William Racklin, Fred Rosenberg, Shirley Silberman Seamus, Mina Shapiro, and Annette Shatkin. Is there anyone else here tonight who's mentioning a name that we did not mention, which wants to share a name? And of course, we invite those at home, if you have names to share as well. We join together with the mourners and rise on page 598. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, ve'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon u'vyomechon u'v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, b'agala v'zman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevarach le'alam u'yamei almayo, Yitbarach, v'yishtabach, v'yitpa'ar, v'yitramam, v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar, v'yitaleh, v'yitalal, shemei dekudsha brichu. Leila min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shalom rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Zichronam livracha, may every one of their memories be for blessing. Please be seated. Again, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Moadim l'simcha. Announcements. First is to please join us for Shabbat Chol HaMoed Sukkot morning services tomorrow, live streamed beginning at 9:30. And those who would like to join us again in our chapel here next door. And otherwise, you can watch it on our website, YouTube, or Facebook channel. Also, a reminder: Torah study will begin at 12 o'clock on Zoom. On Monday, Nida Mitzvah, 11:30. Good. Then at 3:30, we have our Hebrew school again in session, and hopefully the weather will accommodate us. The Social Justice Committee will have its virtual meeting at 5 o'clock the same day. Monday evening, services for Erev Shmini Atzeret Simchat Torah will be live streamed on Zoom. So again, that's where, like what we used to do on a Friday night before we were doing in person, so you can actually see each other. So you can either be on the Zoom itself, follow the link, or you can watch it live streamed on any of the website stuff if you'd like. Obviously, again, this year it's not quite what we want it to be, but I've got some things planned to make it hopefully worthwhile. And if nothing else, you're now armed with all this information about Shmini Atzeret and Simchas Torah, so you have to come and share that with everybody. And again, services Tuesday morning will be at 10 o'clock, not 9:30. I'm sorry to keep confusing everybody, but just a reminder that service doesn't include the service of Yizkor. So again, you can join us. I think it may have been confusing about it. But I think for that service, it is in person if you'd like. It's in the chapel, so if you'd like to come for that service, you're welcome. And if not, again, it will be live streamed for anybody who would like to participate that way. Reminder that our sukkah is still up. It fell down, but it's back up again. It's part of our annual tradition of sukkahs falling down. And it is still available. It's on this side of the building. We'll have an etrog, and again, you can do that all the way up through Shmini Atzeret. You're welcome to use it at any time. And then in October, we've got a lot of great stuff coming back. My class will resume about midway through the month. We also have a boat ride trip at the aquarium in Riverhead, which is going to be great. We also have a noodle-making demo with Sen Restaurant, which will be both a limited number of people in the actual restaurant, and others can just watch it if you want to participate in that. We also have a book talk with Binar Bernard on her well-acclaimed book, Keeping Secrets. And these are just a few of the highlights. There's a lot of other stuff that hopefully you will see very soon. With that, I think that's everything of mine. Anybody additions? No? Good. Good. So we're going to complete our service with a closing song and Kiddush. And I don't know. Gillen? Yeah. Oh, say shalom bimromav. Hu yaseh shalom aleinu. Ve'al kol Yisrael. Ve'imru. Amen. Yaseh shalom. Yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom. Yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. We'll rise in body or spirit and turn to page 123 for Kiddush. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam b'horei perhi hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'ratzav v'hanu v'shabbat kodsho b'ahava uvratzon inchilanu zikaron lema'aseh v'reishit ki hu yom techila lemikrahei kodesh Zecher letziat Mitzrayim Kivanu Vacharta Yotanu Kidashta Mikol Hamim Veshabat Kodshecha Be'ava Uvratzon Inchaltanu Baruch Atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat. Amen. Chaim. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Moedim l'simcha. Chag Sameach.